Hello and welcome to Tuning Tanium, a support center series. For those of you who know me, and for those of you who are joining for the first time, I'm Nikita Merchant. I'm part of Technical Enablement team and your host for today. This session is about Tanium and ServiceNow cover your assets. Let me introduce you to our team. We have Sarah Henderson. She's a support center technical account manager, and I will hand it over to her to do the rest of the introductions. Sarah?
Hi, my name is Sarah Henderson, and you may remember me from such tuning taniums as building rapport with reporting and ask the experts. We have a really special lineup for you today. We are going to be joined by Chris Brucker, who you may remember from cases such as 00206060, Jonathan Strickland, who you may remember from such cases as 00185094, and Cassie Baker, who you may remember from such partner events such as Tanium Tuesdays. So to get started, we are going to have Cassie give us a walkthrough of some of the stuff that's going to be covered today. She is going to be giving us a demo of the Resource Center and what we have available there.
Thank you, and super excited to be here presenting to all of you on Tuning Tanium. I'm here just to quickly showcase some of the resources that are available to all of you in relation to our integrations with ServiceNow. And this is a great place to go if you need further documentation or support for the integration we're going to cover today on Tuning Tanium, as well as the additional integrations that we have. So if you go to the Tanium Resource Center at help.tanium.com and you navigate to the APIs and integrations section, and then from there you click on ServiceNow, you'll land on our homepage for all of our resources regarding Tanium and ServiceNow. So a couple of things I just want to call out for all of you here. First and foremost, we do have several tech talks with ServiceNow and Tanium integrations. So today we're really going to focus in on that asset integration with ServiceNow. And for that, we actually have 2 tech talk videos that go in great detail about how to set up, configure, and troubleshoot these integrations. So this is a great resource in addition to what you'll hear today. Now, in addition to that, the other thing I want to call out here is the Tanium and ServiceNow integration chart. This is just a high-level overview of both the asset integration, which we'll talk about today, as well as the additional integrations that we have with ServiceNow. This is a great high-level view of what capabilities does this integration unlock, and then what are the required Tanium modules and ServiceNow applications for the integration, as well as the RBAC controls and ServiceNow plugins that are needed. Now, in addition to that, the last thing I want to point out to you here are our runbooks, or our documentation on each one of these specific integrations. So if I click on just this IT asset management runbook or documentation, what you'll see is we have detailed documentation for each one of these integrations that walks you through what is the integration, what capabilities does it unlock, as well as how to configure and set up the integration itself. We also have some basic troubleshooting and additional resources within this documentation available to you so that you can, have this on-demand resource for you. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Chris and Sarah, who again are going to be walking through that asset integration with ServiceNow. Over to you guys.
All right, Chris, if you want to share your screen, we can talk a little bit about our agenda for today. So the way that we're going to do things today is going to be a little different than how we normally do these Tuning Tanium events. As Cassie mentioned, there are plenty of resources available out there on start to finish. This is going to be more best practices and scenario-driven conversations. So for this Tuning Tanium, I will be taking on the role of a customer, and Chris is going to be taking on the role of a Tanium employee. Pretty sure he's got this in the bag. So First, we're going to be talking about reviewing data with an asset. We're going to be talking about configuring the view for ServiceNow, pushing data to ServiceNow, pulling data from Tanium, RBACs, tokens, troubleshooting, and then at the end, we are going to have 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So as Nikita mentioned, have those questions ready, and we will do our best to get them answered. All right, so Chris, over to you.
All right. So I wanted to sort of lay out the path that I take most of our customers through to get these integrations set up. And kind of step one is understand the data that Tanium Asset provides. Understand if there are devices in your environment that have duplicate, maybe they have duplicate serial numbers or things. Like, we want to look at that data before we start sending it to ServiceNow. And then once we have that figured out, we may need to add filters to the view that we create to send that data to ServiceNow. You're probably all aware, but if you're not, the Resource Center is there to spell out that we do have two different integration mechanisms with ServiceNow. We have the push and we have the pull. The push integration uses asset, connects out to ServiceNow, and then the pull is connecting via API to asset to gather the information. Then once we connect and have our privileges sorted out, then we walk through the setup instructions and kind of decide what view we want to send and look at the field mappings and all that. We'll be taking you through that today as well. And then we configure a schedule. And our best practice recommendation there is typically once a day. Some customers are sending the data more frequently than that, like every 4, 6, 8 hours. It just depends on what your business requirements are there.
All right, Chris. So I am the customer and I'm interested. Can you tell me a bit more about the methods that are available?
Sure. So we have the push integration. This has existed for several years. There's really not a whole lot new there, but there's a lot that, as you start to get into it, that people may not be aware of. So when this discovery source pushes data out to ServiceNow, it's going to come in as a Tanium discovery source. So when you are working in the CMDB, your ServiceNow admins can easily see what Tanium has sent over. So you can filter that on the Tanium discovery source. When we get credentials to ServiceNow, so Tanium is actually reaching out to ServiceNow using at least privileged set of credentials to push data in batches. So we send first the computers themselves, we send those in batches of 100, and then we send the related items, the network adapters, the disk drives, and installed applications. Those are sent in batches of 5,000. So as those batches go through, they get processed by the IRE, or the Identification and Reconciliation Engine on the ServiceNow side. And their ServiceNow admins can set rules in there, they can set mandatory fields and other things that we have to abide by. And if we don't abide by them, the IRE says you've violated the rules for this particular reason, I'm going to reject your batch. And if I do reject that batch, it means that all 100 computers didn't get sent, or possibly 5,000 related items don't get sent. So if you start to see partially staged data in ServiceNow, but not all of it that you would expect, we may need to work with the ServiceNow teams to better understand what rules we're in violation of. And that's something that Tanium support can help with that conversation as well. Once we pass all the IRE checks, then we write the data to the CMDB in that batches of 100. So you'll see 100 computers getting updated, then 5,000 in applications or related entries.
Okay. What about our other pull option? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the pull option, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to have it use a Tanium discovery source, because then we couldn't differentiate what was pushed in or what was pulled in. So there is a new discovery source for that, and it's SG-Tanium SN. So that discovery source, it pulls data in 100 items at a time, and that this is a little bit different than the push because it's still coming kind of in a batch, but it's grouped together. So there's 100 computers, all their applications, all their network adapters and disk drives and things. It's all packaged together. And then it goes through Integration Hub, which has a robust transform engine. That means there's a mapping file that goes through and processes each item one at a time, and then writes that data through the IRE to the CMDB. So again, all those rules and everything are still in effect. They have to be passed before anything's written to the CMDB. But the big difference here is that we're processing the items one at a time. So if there's one system that causes a violation, it's just that one system that gets skipped, not all 100. So that's the major difference between the push and the pull. Those transform maps are easily customized with the help of either our partner team or ServiceNow. And then each item can be processed separately. So this is very fast and efficient. Both of them are equal pretty much on the performance side of things. It's just the difference of how the data is actually being processed.
Okay. Let's say that as the customer in this scenario, I am interested in pushing data to ServiceNow. What is my first step?
Yeah, so the first step is going to be to make sure that you have this discovery source set up in ServiceNow. So you'll notice here, I'm looking at the discovery source inside the CMDB. We need to make sure that we have the Tanium discovery source there. That has to be manually created by the ServiceNow team. So once they have that in place, we get that done. And then we got to start looking in asset itself.
So the first step for the Tanium side of things.
Yep.
Okay, just double checking. So for the Tanium admins that are listening in, first step.
Yep. So we want to look at, are there any duplicates? So understand the data that you're sending. And that first step there is look at duplicate computer names. You'll see in my environment, what I've done here is I build out a report, and it has this summary report checked. So all I did was create a new report, check this summary report box, and add this computer name attribute.
Can I stop you for a second? What
Sure.
is that summary report button doing, and why is it important?
The summary report groups the data together based upon the attributes that you select. So that's going to give me a count column of all the unique computer names that I have. And that's really easy, makes it really easy to identify where your duplicates are. Another thing that I like to add is this last seen filter. That tells me that asset has seen this device within the last day, and it's going to cut down on a lot of duplicates. So over time, right, you're going to re-image devices or decommission devices, and we don't need to send those to ServiceNow every single day. We just need ServiceNow to know that those devices are there and what their latest state is. So you can save some time and resources by just putting these filters in. So looking at my summary report, again, I'm grouped by the computer name here. You can see I don't have any duplicates in this particular environment for computer name, but let's take a look at serial number and see if that has anything. So again, just to give you an idea of what this looks like, we build a report, check the summary report box so that it's going to group everything by serial number this time. And then I still have my report filter last seen within the last day. And you'll notice, like, this is the actual query that it's going to use, the relative time frame. But every time you load this report, it's going to automatically look back from right now, 1 day in the past. So you see here, I've got 3 systems that report default string, 2 that are system serial number, a couple that are to be filled by OEM, and then the rest of my systems all have unique serial numbers. So I can look into these and drill down and see that I've got 3 different systems here. These are actually different. They're not duplicated. So I may want to actually send those to ServiceNow. But it's always good to check and validate and then bring the ServiceNow team in early on these conversations, just so that you guys can understand that this data is coming from Tanium, because every environment is different and some people may want a unique serial number being sent to ServiceNow.
All right. So I have verified the data in my environment. I know where my duplicates are. I'm working with the team to figure all this out. what do I do next?
So the next piece is configuring the view. If you have not set up Asset before, you'll have a button up here that says Create ServiceNow View. It'll create this ServiceNow reserved view. And that, you'll notice I can't make any changes to it. I can test it and verify that all the attributes are there, but I have to create a copy in order to make changes. And almost always you're going to want to make modifications to this, simply because the things that we just talked about in the report, right? Adding in a relative date time filter, looking things for the last one day. Also, you may want to add additional filters to things. So let me pull up my ServiceNow reserved one that I made a copy of and show you how we could do that. So I don't need to necessarily change the fields here. All these fields that are included in the view are exactly what we need. But if I needed to, I could make modifications here. And if I want to add a filter, I can come in here and add our last scene within the last one day. Save that. And then I could also add in an additional filter. Do you have any in mind, Sarah?
What about the serial number to be filled by OEM that you had in your report? Obviously, some others might have different things, like maybe they have blank columns where that data wasn't populated, or things like that they want to filter out and not have sent over until that data is populated.
Sure. So let's, we can do does not contain and then fill out a value here, default string. I can put that something like that. If we want to make sure that everything has a value and it's not coming back blank, we can do is not null. Anytime you're doing a negative filter, like does not contain or is not null, make sure you're anding those. It's very easy for people to just say, oh, I want this or this or this. But when you're doing negatives, you want to make sure they're anded together.
Okay. What if I have a team of people that are working with us, and whenever new computers come in, they get those imaged, but they use a name, like a temporary placeholder name during the imaging process, like rename me or something like that. What if I don't want that data sent over until they get the official name in place? What would I do for a situation like that?
Sure. We can go and we'll filter on computer name. Does not contain, rename me as an example, right? So once everything has a legitimate name that's not rename me, then it will be included in this view. And this is dynamic, right? So every time you go to load this view, whether that's sending the data out via the push or pulling the data in, but with the pull, all of these filters are relative and they're evaluated at the time that those actions kick off.
Okay. Okay. So then we would submit this, and what's going to happen next?
So we've got our view in place. Kind of sticking with our theme here of the pull, we can go ahead, or I'm sorry, the push, we can go ahead and set up our destination itself. So we do that under inventory management and destinations. And this is not meant to be comprehensive, right? Kathy covered earlier. We've got videos that walk through step-by-step how to do this, but just to kind of give you a high-level overview of what this would look like, you specify a name, the URL of your ServiceNow environment, the username, and the password. And you would need, we have it all documented. There's a least privilege set of roles that need to be added to ServiceNow for this user that gets created. Once I have that all entered in, and I set my schedule here of how often I want to pull the data, I'll create a new destination.
So I have a question about that.
Yep.
So you said the best practice is to have this run once a day. Is that still applicable for when we're first getting started and we're trying to get all that data where it belongs?
Yeah, so you may want to disable the schedule initially, just to make sure that the data does end up where you expect it to. And again, this is where you're going to send some data to ServiceNow. The ServiceNow team is going to evaluate that it looks okay and it's in the formats that they expect it to be in. So it may make sense to disable the schedule while you're verifying things and then turn it on once you've validated everything. And always everybody test in a lower environment, right?
Right. Fair enough. So dependent upon your situation and your environment when you're first getting things configured. But the best practice, once you've got everything good, is that like once a day for the data, unless you need something more aggressive.
Correct.
You know what you're putting down? Awesome. All right. So we are now in our destination page. Talk to me a little bit about what we've got going on here, please.
Okay, so we've got a number of different mappings. Again, I can choose my ServiceNow view here that I want. And that is just basically telling Asset, this is the data that I want to use. I want these particular fields filtered down with those filters that we just added. And then you'll see that there's a number of default mappings here. You've got the computer information, storage devices, network adapters, software. It's all built and pre-mapped for you. And you'll notice that we have a source table. This tells you where in Asset we're going to get our information from, what set of attributes we're going to pull it in from. And then you have a destination. So on the computer table here, we map servers to the server table. We map Windows and Mac devices to the PC hardware table by default. We've got Linux in there, AIX, Solaris. We've got all that set up for you. Nothing to worry about there. And then we get into our fields. So you shouldn't have to change anything here, but just so you have an understanding, on the left-hand side of the screen is the ServiceNow field name, and on the right-hand side of the screen is the Tanium field name. So that's how this mapping file works.
These aren't a one-to-one. So what if I wanted to verify, let's say I'm trying to add something new, and I want to verify what the Tanium field name would be. How would I find that information?
Excellent. So under inventory management, we have entities and attributes. And I already have that up over here. This may be called just inventory management and attributes, depending upon the version of Asset that you're running, because we did change it recently. But it's the same page. So I can see right here that there's 60 different entities. Let's just search for something like IP address. So I'm looking at, I know that this is coming from the sensor Tanium client IP address. And if I expand this out, I can see that it's in the asset table and the field name is IP address. Well, that's great, but it doesn't exactly match that format that it was in that mapping file. So in order to get that information, we can go to Customize Columns, add in table name, add in field name, and now you can see that source that we were looking at, the mapping was mapped to the CI item table, which is the asset table under the covers. And then the actual field name in the database is IP_address. Most things are going to follow this format, but some don't. So it's always a good idea to validate that.
Okay. So let's say that I want to see a list of things that I could customize. Is there something like that that's already out there on the Resource Center, maybe?
We do. The Resource Center has the complete listing of each of these mappings that we were just looking at. So for the computer table mapping, here's on the left, keeping with our theme, the ServiceNow attribute, and then on the right is the asset attribute that we're using. And there's some comments here if that data exists for certain situations or not, maybe based on the operating system of the device or what modules are owned in ServiceNow. Some of these things are populated and some are not. So we've got storage device, file system, and things there. And then for software, we do support the Software Asset Management Pro of ServiceNow, as well as just the default software package table.
Okay. So so I'm a Tanium administrator, right? This looks like a very small list. What if what I want to send to ServiceNow is not on this list? What would be my course of action then?
Yeah, so Asset has the information, right? But sometimes you may need a little help figuring out how to get it there. And that's where we really rely on our partner team. We've got a number of certified partners. I'm sure Kathy can remind me the exact count. But we do have a team of folks that are available that can help with that. And the best way to do that is engage your account manager, and they can help make those connections for you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. All right. So moving right along, we've created our destination. We are getting there. We're going. What do I need to do next?
All right. So as far as the next steps with the push, it's really just you can run that on its own schedule. Like if we don't have it scheduled, I can come in here and run it on my own. Or it'll tell you like this is scheduled to run and when its next upcoming run is. So that will handle pretty much everything for the push. If we want to get into the pool, it's again follows that same thing. We've got to find a way to authenticate ourselves from ServiceNow into Tanium.
Okay.
So in order to do that, again, we have a Resource Center article going into the roles that are needed. But how you build that out is largely dependent upon your organization's requirements. So I'm going to start with a persona. Personas are great because you can easily assign them to any user and give that persona additional permissions that are completely different from what that user's actual permissions are. So inside here, I'm following our best practice of asset report reader and gateway user.
Best practices for what we are currently configuring, not every
Correct.
integration. Just
For Service Graph Connector specifically, yeah. Another recommendation is build these based upon what they're going to be used for. So if Service Graph Connector needs permissions, build a persona for Service Graph Connector. If you're going to integrate with VR or something else, build a persona for that. That way you don't have to have one account that has a ton of permissions across all things Tanium. You're keeping at least privilege and keeping things secure.
that makes sense.
And then you'll see I assigned it over here to my Tanium admin user. So now I can switch over to that persona, and you'll notice that my view of Tanium just got really small. I can see asset. I can't see my inventory management or my destinations, but I don't need to. For the pool integration, really what I'm worried about here is building an API token so that ServiceNow can interface with Tanium. Don't worry about this error. We filed a JIRA for it. We're hopefully going to have it fixed soon. It's not going to impact what we're doing.
Okay.
What we will need to do is build out an API token. So again, best practice, API token for each individual environment that you're going to be interfacing with. So if you've got a development ServiceNow environment, build out a token for that environment. If you've got a test or a production, create a separate token.
Is there a reason why?
Yeah, so the Service Graph Connector and a lot of our integrations have their own mechanism for rotating the tokens. They check on a regular basis. The Service Graph Connector actually checks daily to see if the token is close to expiring. If it's within 24 hours of being expired, Service Graph Connector is going to rotate that token. So if it rotates that token in dev and it runs through that, it only changes it in dev. It doesn't change it in UAT or production. So that's going to mean that once that changes, the other two environments are now broken if you shared that token across. That's why 1-to-1.
1-to-1, understood. So I see the expiration here. It defaults to 7. Is there a recommended best practice for our expiration period that we configure?
So 30 days is what most of the integrations go for. Certainly because it's being checked every day, you can set it as low as you'd like. Some customers opt to go for a year at a time. It really just depends on the organization's requirements, but 30 days is a safe default.
Okay.
All right.
So next we would put in our IP addresses. Can you talk to me a little bit about where I need to find those or what they would be?
Sure. So in my case, I have a ServiceNow environment, and it is my Tanium environment is my home lab. So it's considered on-prem. So I have a ServiceNow mid server that sort of acts as a proxy between me and ServiceNow. So for that case, and I've got a little window open here, I've got my mid server running on this device, and we'll see that here. So I need the IP address of this device, the mid server, that's going to talk to my Tanium environment. So I would put in the IP address of my mid server if I was on-prem. So I have that already created over here, this 192.168.20.101, and I've got it in my notes here that this is for the mid server. So I've gone ahead and I created that for a 30-day expiration. And then I will take that token that gets generated and copy it over. Now I have that right here just for demonstration purposes. So this token string is what you need to copy. It pops up inside of inside of Tanium when you generate it. But you'll need this token string to go get the Service Graph connector going. And you need the entire string. So token hyphen and then all the letters and numbers after it. So don't leave out that token hyphen. That is important.
Understood.
All right. So if I go over to Service Graph connector, that's over here. Let me refresh this real quick. So in Service Graph connector, we're not going to go through every one of these steps, right? Because we have a whole video for that. But I set my authentication type to token. I would put my token in right here on the token auth credentials section, and then I would configure my connection. And under here, if you are a cloud customer, you put in the vanity name of your cloud environment -api.cloud.tanium.com. And that's it. You're off to the races. If you are on-prem, like we are here, I would check use a mid server, and then I would want to select my specific mid server that I want to use. So it'll show up here from our list. We'll select that, and then I would put in like Tanium server.domain.com or 192.168, whatever the IP address is of your on-prem Tanium environment. And this is the Tanium server that you would want to communicate with, not the module server.
So I messed up when I was creating my API token. I didn't copy the word token. And so I had to recreate it. Can you tell me, is there anything I have to do after recreating that token to ensure that everything is going to work on the ServiceNow side?
Yeah, so we see this happen quite often. It's one of the biggest reasons that people call in for support. So again, go back to the guided setup. And what I like to do is just walk through the entire steps again. So the authentication type, we know it's going to be token. You probably don't have to change that, but set your token auth here again, put the whole token in, token hyphen, the rest of the string there, and then walk through the configure the connection step. Make sure that the IP address or the host name of the Tanium environment that you want to connect to is there. And then configure the view is the next big thing. So once you click this configure button, it's actually going to reach out to Tanium and provide you with that list of all the views. So anytime you change the token, you have to come back through and reconfigure the view as well. So just start at the top and work your way through the setup.
Gotcha. Okay. Where would I go if I was looking to find the IP addresses for my API token for cloud? Like if I'm a cloud customer and I need to know those ServiceNow IP addresses when I'm creating the token. Can you kind of tell me where to go to find that?
Sure. So we actually have a document on the Resource Center for this. Let me go over to ServiceNow here. Category, ServiceNow. I'm going to choose this client software one just because I know where it's at. Under configure the API token, we have a whole link here for determining the trusted IP addresses of the token. And ServiceNow actually has a great article on this that you can send to your ServiceNow's team. They have to go into the Now support portal, request my IP information, and when that shows up, they'll have a link right here. And what they want is this source address used for integrations into customer network with no VPN. I'm going to blow that up nice and big so everybody can see it. So right here is what they're going to want. Source address for customer network with no VPN. What that ends up being is it's usually if you have a production instance, there's going to be two sets of IPs. They're always a group, so it usually ends in a /29. If you're production, there's going to be two there. If you are a dev or a UAT environment, something that's non-production, it's going to just be one set of IPs. So this is what you want to use when you configure your API token inside of Tanium.
Okay, understood. Is there anything that I need to be aware of in terms of like multi-factor authentication or anything like that with personas or user accounts, whichever method I choose?
That's a good point as well. So if you are on-prem, most customers they can easily create a new user, and they may create a user that's unique and dedicated for that integration. And that's perfectly fine. So building those users out is no big deal. But in cloud, because we do have the requirement of multi-factor authentication, we need to figure out how we're going to make that work for an additional user. So I can create a new user, but I have to figure out how I'm going to do the multi-factor for that person. So I think what most customers do, just to keep things simple, is they will create a persona with the least privilege role, and then assign that to an admin on the Tanium side and have them create those API tokens as that persona.
So all the moderators can come on video and answer some questions we have a lot of questions. So let's get to that.
All right. So Chris, I'm going to direct this one here to you. A customer is asking, we previously had SCCM feeding ServiceNow. What are the best practices to do with that data before using Asset to push data to ServiceNow?
So if you had other discovery sources, this is where ServiceNow really shine. And that kind of goes back to the identification and reconciliation engine. It's going to be the one that looks for a match that already exists inside the CMDB. So if SCCM was previously populating the CMDB, it's probably going to give a computer name or a serial number for that, and Asset will be able to match with that information, and it should update those items in the CMDB. What you could do, just to kind of dip your toe into things, is we could come into your view inside Asset and filter it down to just a couple of devices, right? If you want to test this out. So you can say computer name is this exact thing. And we can filter that down to just a single device and test it out that way.
Awesome. Is it possible to pass the last_seen field to ServiceNow so that it updates last_discovered?
So last_discovered should be updated automatically when the identification reconciliation engine puts that device in the CMDB. What some customers do opt to do is they send the last seen field, and they create a custom field in the computer table that's called like Tanium last seen, and they write the data to that field. But last discovered, we let ServiceNow handle. Its normal process handle it.
Okay. So we've touched on this one a little bit already. You mentioned that the minimum that we recommend is to sync once a day, but you did also mention that some customers do it more frequently than others. What would be a reason for wanting to import that data more frequently, or export that data more frequently? I'm sorry.
So sometimes it's based upon the workflow that the service request process has to go through, right? So you you onboarded a new device, it's been imaged, it has software, and now it needs to go be deployed to that person or something. So you want that information inside the CMDB. Some customers, they have the devices created when they buy them, when they're procured, they get created in the CMDB. Other customers have them created by whatever imaged them. So if you're using Tanium Provision, or you're having our asset module feed the CMDB for that, we're going to know about it first before anything else. So that's where it makes sense to run it more frequently, so you can catch those newly built devices.
Okay. Can ServiceNow update tagging on endpoints?
So we have a couple ways we can do this. We have a way that with our integration core, or our Tanium SDK as it's been renamed recently, it can pull in information from ServiceNow and then tag the endpoints via Tanium. So it uses Tanium enhanced tags to write that data. If you want to have, that's what I'm interpreting the question as, is that you want ServiceNow data to be used to tag the endpoint. If you want to take custom tag information from Tanium and have that written into ServiceNow, that might be something that we could do. It might be a little more involved, but we can definitely have a conversation about it, the account team and the partner team.
Okay. Just a few more questions here. How do you test the additional token/connection for the multi-instance setup, similar to how you check the connection for single instance?
So the test for me is this right here. I actually use the configure the view as my test. If I can click configure and this loads, that means my token is good, because I've communicated with Tanium and I've got my list of views here to choose. And you should get that whether you're doing a single instance or a multi-instance setup.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So I think we've talked about this some already, but how are duplicate asset names handled when the push operation loads from Tanium asset module into the CMD? For example, short names versus fully qualified names.
So since we're talking about push, let me go over and I'll share my screen here. Let me hit share there. So on this screen, where we have our name, we have a variable in here, SN computer name. Behind the scenes, what that's doing is it's taking and it's looking at the computer name field that Tanium provides. Sometimes we provide a short name, most of the time we provide a fully qualified domain. So we actually will rewrite the name to a short name if it isn't already there, because that's what ServiceNow expects, is a short name. So we write that back to just a short name, and then we take the rest of that information and it becomes the ServiceNow OS domain. So it gets written to the OS domain field inside ServiceNow. So we take the fully qualified domains and we kind of split them down into a short name and the domain itself. So what ServiceNow is looking at are these two attributes right here, name and serial number. So the name is always going to be the short name, and then the serial number is going to be whatever is an asset. And that goes back to our number one, where we started here, looking at our duplicate computer names and serial numbers. So this computer name report, we can build this to just include the short name, right? That's something we could do. But then the serial number really is going to be what ServiceNow tries to match on first. They have a whole set of rules in the identification engine that they follow. So computer name and serial number are both in there, but serial number usually has a higher weight by default.
Okay. Since we're talking about serial numbers already, is there a batch search by serial option with Tanium?
I think he means so that we don't have to list out 40 rows of serial numbers. And you can kind of get around this by doing something like serial number matches and do a regular expression of this or this or this. That's about the best way we have in Asset to do multiple serial number lookups. This would be a regular expression.
A follow-up to the short name question that we just had. What if the asset does not have a domain name, only the host name?
Then the domain name field goes over as a blank. And sometimes ServiceNow has a rule that says that that cannot be blank. It's a mandatory field. So that's again where kind of have to check and validate that. But if it was a blank and Tanium is allowed to update it, then it would take and just put a blank value in for the domain name.
All
Awesome.
right, Chris.
Okay.
Sorry, Jonathan. I see that
Sure.
we do have one other question. You mentioned that we need to recreate the view. If we have to recreate the API token, why can't the existing view be used? So I think we just need to kind of go back over this and word it so that it makes a little bit more sense, because I think we might have been a little bit confusing when we were talking about that. You don't have to recreate the whole view. You have to go through the steps of setting the view within the walkthrough, just so that ServiceNow sees the new information. Is that correct, Chris?
Right, you're reconfiguring the view is probably the best way to put that. So if you change your token, or your token has expired and ServiceNow wasn't able to rotate it, when you set the credentials, those need to be changed. Then you verify that the connection details are right, and then you reconfigure the view. And the reason for that is you want ServiceNow to reach out with that new set of credentials that you gave it, that new API token, make that fresh connection to Tanium, and then reselect your view. When the token expires, or if it was never correct, there's this view information in ServiceNow is not going to be set. So that's why we tell you to go through and reset it. It's not that you have to recreate it, it's just that it has to be selected again. What's next?
So, can we have a view template?
We sort of have one, and that's where I made a copy here. So the view template is ServiceNow reserved. That is your template, and you create a copy of that, and you build off of that. So with Service Graph Connector, we do have some additional attributes that are required for that, and then some extra filters that need to be added. So that ServiceNow reserved is sort of your template and starting point. And once you have that, right, you can duplicate any view inside of Tanium. You can just hit the copy button, and they can sort of be used as your template.
So we have one other question here. I currently set asset module to run every 3 hours, but can it run hourly? Is there any impact?
So the only impact there would be it's resources on both sides, right? So if you run if the export can run and finish in an hour, you can run it in an hour. But the best way to think about that is if you I could set asset to export every 30 minutes if I wanted to. If it takes 35 minutes to run, it's going to skip that middle execution there. So in your example of the question, if let's say it takes an hour to export the data, or an hour and 5 minutes, and you run it every hour, you're going to run it initially. It's going to take an hour and 5 minutes to finish. So you're going to skip that middle run, and then 2 hours later, it'll run again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. And if anyone still has questions on that, like, please feel free to pop back in here. So the data gets updated every 3 hours.
Essentially, yes, because it skips the intermediate run if it's still running. And that applies to both importing data into asset and exporting data with the push. And Service Graph Connector also as well. It will not run multiple runs. If something is in progress, it keeps that one in progress and then moves on to the next one at the next scheduled time.
All right, we have another question.
Okay, sorry.
Are there any plans to add is one of to the asset filter search?
We can certainly check and see if there's any open feature requests for that.
And if there's
Might
not,
be
we can
a
get
good
one filed.